I was in New Zealand finding myself in my early 20s, feeling that I'd found myself a nice girl with a van and we were trekking around surfing and hiking. All I ate was shoplifted trail mix for that whole month. We were with this annoying Spanish girl for a bit of the trip and aimed to go on a few-day hike in the mountains on the South Island. We joked about losing her along the way to get a moment alone. We started the hike in the afternoon and a few hours in, we were at our cabin for the night. My pal felt a urinary tract infection coming on and thought it best to turn back. I have that affect on women. I decided I was gonna finish the hike myself. We were mere hours in and I had 2 more days and 2 more cabins to stay at by myself. I was actually kind of looking forward to it for some reason. Wanted to get some early 20s ruminating done probably. Think about philosophy or some shit. First day hike, a bit wet but uneventful. First cabin had modern digs, wood fire, heaps of bunks. Some old couple there playing board games. Next day I got up and immediately got lost. Ended up off the beaten track and had to turn back. It was raining and slippery and horrible. Lost maybe 3 hours. This meant I rocked up to my second cabin right on dark instead of in the afternoon. It was so old that it didn't have a door. There were sections of wall missing. I immediately tried to get some firewood, but everything was wet cause it was still raining. A storm was settling in. There was an old saw on the bench by the guest book and some remnants of dry kindling. I tried to cut some wood in the rain, but it was past dark, so I accepted I'd barely have a fire that night. The last thing I did before bed was sign into the guest book. So search and rescue know who's been where, and can track you if you get lost. I look at this fucking book and inside it were a few people's names and the date they stayed. One from 10 years ago. One from 7 years ago. Great. Then scrawled in big letters over the rest of the available columns on the page were the words, "Do not stay here." I lifted the page to see the next. And on the next page over all the columns there was a drawing of what looked like a dog, like a greyhound in silhouette, but with a silly kind of human face stretched down the muzzle. I kinda smiled at it, but it chills my blood to think back to now. Just figured the warnings were like a prank or something, and the dog was an unrelated doodle. I drag a horrible old mattress out of the tiny sleeping quarters with a few old bunks, and I make a bed down by my sputtering fire. As I'm setting wet wood to dry by it, I see a metal plaque above the fireplace. It reads Hound Cabin. Basically, it just details that some old bloke and his dog lived up here, and one time the river raged such that he couldn't get across to get their usual supplies, and they died. This kind of freaked me out, to be honest, and I thought for a second about what to do. The fire was sputtering and casting these deep shadows across the cabin, and no fucking door. I could see trees swaying and the rain bucketing down outside. I was defenseless. I put my coat back on and walked down the path to see if I could see the way back. It was stormy, but I had a good head torch. Maybe I could finish the hike tonight and not sleep in the creepiest cabin ever. But as I walked ahead a bit I realized there was a full river right there. It was too swollen to cross and I could only make out the stepping stones to get over it because water was hitting them and spraying up in the air. It just wasn't safe. So I head back to the cabin to try and get some sleep. I'm sort of laying there, uncomfortable when I'm facing the door and getting chills on my neck when I'm facing away from it. I think I must have been exhausted enough that I managed to fall into a shallow sleep despite my extreme anxiety. Just imagining this dude and his dog. At some point in the night something ran into the cabin. Full on ran in. Dog toenails on crude wooden floorboards. My eyes shot open. I was on my back. My fire was dead. And the black silhouette of a skinny dog stood between me and the dark blue hue of the sky through the door. It had noticed me and bowed its head down defensively. It walked toward me in this unnatural way. Like it had human shoulder blades protruding with each step, like a man walking on his hands and feet. Lighting cracks outside and lights up its face, and the breath disappeared from my lungs. Straight up winded me. It was like a human skin had been stretched over a malnourished greyhound. The head was the shape and profile of a dog, but stretched over it was the misshapen face of a man. The hound's feet looked like a human walking on its knuckles. It seemed basically hairless and had pallid white skin. It was basically over me at that point. I was in its house, and it wasn't pleased. I closed my eyes as it proceeded to aggressively sniff me all over, its nose scraping against my sleeping bag. One paw stood on the mattress as it moved down my body. I just kept my eyes shut and found myself repeating that this was just terrible sleep paralysis. Eventually, I felt it settle at the end of my mattress, but I didn't look to see. I've had sleep paralysis before it had to be that. I was on my back. That's when I get it. There's no way this man ate his dog and this was their fate. Nope. Just sleep paralysis. In the morning, I found a dog's skull up on one of the roof supports. I crushed it underfoot before I left. The river was still swollen, but I waded through and never looked back. Hello. I don't know if anyone will see this, but I need your help. Urgently. I woke up yesterday at around 3 p.m. I have a terrible sleep schedule. Walked out of my room and saw a large oak tree in my kitchen. The tree's trunk was about 3 feet wide, connecting the roots, which were digging into the floor, beneath my feet to its leaf-covered branches, which extended up to the ceiling where they had to stop for lack of room. Its bark was thick and knotted, and rough to the touch as I learned when I cautiously put my hand on it. I don't exactly have the largest of kitchens, so the place where the tree now stood was previously occupied by a red spinning stool, which I could see brief glimpses of from a small gap in the tree, a bit like a thin gap in a cave tunnel. I am not a caver, so I did not reach inside to see if I could fit, so my stool remained there, with the tree growing around it. After a few hours of standing there, poking and prodding the tree in disbelief, I looked up if this had ever happened to anyone else. Turns out, if there was a tree growing inside of a human residence, it was usually in an abandoned one, or done on purpose as some sort of decorative piece. Never on the second floor of an apartment complex, and never, ever overnight. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to call my dad. He didn't pick up. Typical. I called my sister, but for some reason she thought I was joking and hung up on me. I took some photos, but when I looked at them before sending, I noticed something even weirder. The tree was not there. I tried again, and again, and again. Eventually, I went and got my cheap instant film camera and took a picture, and it showed up on that. But when I took a picture of the photo I had taken, the entire photograph was missing, and my phone only took a picture of the kitchen counter under it. I don't know why, but I think it was the tree's fault. Somehow this thing isn't letting me prove it existed at all. After I sat down some more, I thought of who would ever believe me that a fully grown tree somehow spawned in my kitchen. My landlord wouldn't, especially not without proof. And with the housing market the way it is, I don't really want to risk seeming crazy and getting kicked out. Eventually, I realized the tree's roots were growing through the floor below me, so theoretically, they might be growing into the apartment below mine. I grabbed the photo and I went downstairs as quickly as possible, forgetting to lock my door on the way out. Usually, I lock my doors whether or not I was inside or outside. Not that my apartment complex was particularly shady or anything, but this one time I was so adamant on getting help I completely forgot to. I ran down the stairs, jumping from the second one from the bottom to the floor to save time, like every second counted. I found the apartment that was below mine. I knew it was this one because mine is the furthest one away in the whole way from the elevator, and so was this one. I knocked on the door and noticed something. The photograph I was holding when I left my apartment, the one I distinctly remember holding at every part of that journey, was somehow gone. I frantically checked every pocket I had and couldn't see it on the floors of the hallway I was in. I was about to walk down to check when the door opened. A man, in his early 50s if I had to guess, opened the door. Based on the look in his eyes, he was clearly already annoyed. So I knew if I told him why I was here I would instantly have the door slammed in my face. So instead I briefly explained that I was his upstairs neighbor, and was wondering if he had had any trouble with his ceiling at all, like cracks, stains or damages of any kind. None whatsoever. Although you could be quieter sometimes. Some people like to sleep at night, you know, he said, throwing an accusatory glance at me. Oddly for me, however, was the fact that he was clearly telling the truth. Behind him I could see where his kitchen was, and the ceiling was fine, meaning either the roots had grown entirely within the space between the bottom of his ceiling and the top of my floor, or it had no roots at all. I went home, dejected, and as I went to push open my door it wouldn't budge. I already explained earlier that on this occasion I specifically left my door unlocked, and that was proven further when I tried my key. It wasn't the lock that was holding the door shut. Something was on the other side pushing it closed. After trying and failing to open it several times, I decided to shoulder barge it. But as I hit the door, all resistance dissipated and I fell completely on the floor. I laid there on the floor, in the shade of my kitchen tree. I bashed my head a little bit as I hit the floor. So, when I got up I went to take a Tylenol or something. But for some reason, my faucet wasn't working, no water came out, and I realized that if the tree was growing in my floor, it was probably breaking my pipes, giving me an opportunity to get my landlord to send someone over to fix it. Someone who would see the tree and see that I'm not crazy. My plan was working flawlessly. A plumber was coming the next day at 9:30 a.m. in order to fix my water, and soon I wouldn't be alone in my tree problem. I decided to try and sleep a bit more so I could wake up in time to see the plumber. But then the tree started groaning. I know trees groan and creak in the wind, but this wasn't that. This was pure moans of despair, sobs, and the choking back of tears. Every time I closed my eyes, the tree filled my brain with the images of heartbreaks I don't think I can understand. Cries of terror mixed with babies sobbing with the quiet despairs of a grieving parent. I didn't get any rest. After a full night of this, the tree's cries were interrupted by a knock at my door. Thank God, the plumber had finally arrived. I opened the door and to my utter horror he just said, "Hi, I'm here about the plumbing." No mention of the 8-foot-tall tree growing into my ceiling. No mentions of the wails echoing from its branches. Nothing. I had no choice than to let him in and watch him fix my plumbing, which turned out to be entirely unrelated to the tree. I walked to the other side of the kitchen when I saw it atop the red stool in the caver crack in the tree. The photograph, if I just reached in and showed it to the plumber, maybe he would understand. I pushed my fingers in between the bark of the tree and grasped the photo. It was at this moment that the plumber turned around. "Oh my God, what are you doing? Stay away from me." He dropped his bag and ran out of my apartment. I tried to pull my hand out, but I swear it was tighter than when I put it in. My left hand is stuck in the tree. It's been an hour and nobody will pick up their phones, not even the police. This is my only idea, but I don't know if anyone will see this. If you do, please help me. Nobody else can see it, and I'm afraid of what they see instead. Our nightmare began on a Thursday afternoon. My husband Jason and I were heading to Maine for a much-needed week-long staycation at his family's lake house. We hadn't had a proper vacation in ages, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic and other life stresses. Little did we know, this trip would be far from the relaxing break we had anticipated. I overpacked as usual, stuffing the trunk and frunk of our car with everything we might need. Jason, ever the minimalist, packed only the essentials. We left Ohio around 2 p.m. Knowing it would be a long drive to Maine, we mapped out our route, prioritizing charging stations, which unfortunately added extra time to our journey. A few hours in, Jason noticed we needed to stop at the next charging station as our battery was running low. I was relieved because I needed a coffee and a restroom break. We pulled into a generic gas station with a few charging stations beside it. Jason plugged in the car and went inside to get my usual coffee order. Meanwhile, I headed to the restroom. As I was finishing up, a man entered and looked at me with a creepy smile. "My oh my, what a handsome young man," he said. "I'm 31, but look much younger. often mistaken for someone in their late teens. I awkwardly thanked him and hurried out. To my discomfort, I noticed the man had followed me out of the restroom. I quickly walked back to our car where Jason was watching Netflix while the car charged. The man glared at me, making me uneasy, but I kept it to myself. We charged for another 30 minutes before hitting the road again. Around 8 p.m., I noticed a black sedan had been following us for the past hour. Feeling paranoid, I mentioned it to Jason. He reassured me, reminding me we were on a highway, which calmed me down a bit. I tried to shake off the feeling and eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, we were in New York. I was surprised we hadn't stopped to recharge in Pennsylvania, but we needed to find a charging station soon. I glanced in the mirror and saw the same black sedan still behind us. My anxiety spiked, but I convinced myself it was just a coincidence. Jason suggested we find a hotel with a charging station since he was exhausted and I couldn't drive due to my medication. We found one in Massachusetts. After a quick stop at a gas station for coffee and snacks, we headed to the hotel. Jason dozed off again as I watched some Netflix, trying to keep my nerves in check. The hotel turned out to be more of a motel, old yet modern. Jason collapsed onto the bed the second we entered our room. I went out to the balcony to admire the night sky and get some fresh air. From there, I could see the parking lot. 4 vehicles were parked, presumably the receptionists, the caretakers, our car, and a black sedan. My heart sank. It was the same car. Fear gripped me, but I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. I went back inside, locked the balcony door, and lay down next to Jason. I woke up to violent banging on our door, far from a housekeeping knock. Terrified, I shook Jason awake. He immediately went into protective mode, instructing me to call 911. The man outside shouted, "I know you're in there, handsome." My blood ran cold. I frantically explained to the 911 operator while Jason held the door back. I told him about the man from the gas station. Jason fought to keep the door shut, but the man was relentless. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the man charged in. Jason tackled him, yelling for me to lock myself in the bathroom. I didn't want to leave him, but knew I had to. The operator tried to calm me as I heard the struggle outside. Then, I heard Jason cry out in pain, followed by a heavy thud. My worst fears seemed to be coming true. Fueled by adrenaline, I grabbed the nearest object for a weapon. I wouldn't let this man hurt Jason or escape. I burst out of the bathroom and saw the man trying to flee. I attacked him with everything I had, blinded by rage and fear. The police arrived just in time, pulling me off him and securing the scene. Jason was alive, though badly hurt. We spent the rest of the night giving statements and at the hospital. We later learned the man was a sexual predator with a history of stalking and harassment. His primary targets were young men. Thankfully, he was caught and put behind bars indefinitely. Jason and I didn't get our staycation, but we did survive to tell a tale that still sends shivers down my spine every time I recount it.